A few years back, during the dark times, I built my wife Katie a desk so she could work from home comfortably in our spare bedroom. The world has long since gone back to normal, but Katie's employer was impressed enough with her work that she still gets to work from home a few days a week. After a few years this way, she decided she wanted a desk with a little more real estate and the option to raise up and down so she could stand while working, or even use her new mini treadmill while she does her job staring at spreadsheets that look like the scrolling matrix code. The first thing I need is a bunch of lumber, and for this, I decided to use some of the extra squirrely pieces I had hidden away in the corner of the shed. This stack contained a bunch of walnut of inconsistent thicknesses that looked like waves on a lake due to a dull or loose blade during the sawmill process. Some of them came off the sawmill so ugly that I contemplated cutting it into firewood right then and there, but I figured they still had some potential, so I stored them in a pile for years, and now they get to become a desk. After making a flat face and a square edge on the joiner, I ripped a parallel edge on the table saw, then ran everything through the planer to get them to the same thickness. Because of how wavy they were, and the variety of thicknesses from board to board, this step took a whole bunch of passes. With my now more uniform boards, I arranged them on the workbench to make the best looking desktop I could. The front and back edges needed to be free from defects, and the sides with the fewest knots faced up. Then I clamped them together so I could draw a bunch of lines, starting with the left and right edges where they would get cut off, then making a series of evenly spaced lines to mark the locations for biscuits. With all this sorted out, I grabbed my biscuit joiner and started making the cuts that will contain the little wooden footballs. For this build, I'm not so concerned with these adding strength, it's more about keeping the boards flush with each other during the glue up, so there's less waste when I have to flatten out the larger panel. Assembly was pretty standard. Just slather on glue, put all the footballs in place, line everything up, and throw on some clamps. Even with the biscuits, some of the boards were fighting me, so I used small clamps on the ends to help keep things flush before tightening the parallel clamps. Once those were tight, I could take off the small clamps and wipe away the glue squeeze out with a wet rag. After drying, I removed the clamps and took the panels out. This desk will end up being 30 inches deep, but since my planer's capacity is limited to 20 inches, I'm gluing it in 2 steps. Now I can throw these panels through the planer to get the seams perfectly flush. I put tape over all the cracks and voids on the bottom to prevent anything from leaking through, then used a black tinted epoxy to fill all the imperfections on the top side. After drying, I removed all the tape, then ran the panels through the planer again to knock down the epoxy lumps and even out the surface. I knew all this planing would remove the alignment marks on top, so I marked the edges beforehand so I could line things back up now. With those footballs buried in there, it's important to know where they are so you don't accidentally expose one when you cut the ends to length. Go ahead, ask me how I figured that one out. I cut the last few notches with the biscuit joiner in the center seam, then added glue and biscuits before clamping it together. Since this monster will no longer fit through my planer, the more perfect I get this seam now, the less sanding I'll have to do later. So I used little clamps on the ends again, then I have these massive F-clamps that can reach all the way to the center and force the boards in line before I tightened the parallel clamps. Just to prove I could do it, I ran the whole thing over the joiner to perfect one edge, then cut the opposite edge to the final width on the table saw. I used a circular saw and a straight edge guide to cut the ends, and it helps to have a fresh battery when making a little cordless saw work this hard. I spent a good amount of time sanding, making sure that the center seam disappeared and making the entire surface smooth to the touch and ready to accept finish. I took the sanding all the way to 220 grit, then went one step further to 320 on the end grain. End grain tends to get darker when finish is applied, but if you sand it to a finer grit than everything else, it tends to match better. I used a sanding pad on a multi-tool to go around and break all the edges. Katie didn't want them to have any sort of a profile, so this will let them have that square look without actually being sharp. Then I used a brush-on lacquer for a finish. Lacquer has a serious stink to it, and you have to use it with good ventilation. But if you can get past that, it looks great, it's easy to use, and it dries fast. For the legs, I went with this height-adjustable set from FlexiSpot. I actually used them once before on a desk build I did for my mother about a year ago. If you'd like to see a more complicated desktop, I'll leave a link to that video here. Katie, I'm guessing like most people, really hates the rat's nest of wires you typically see behind computer monitors and hanging under a desk, so we're also putting in a cable management tray that will make things appear much more neat and tidy. So on the bottom, I line a template up on center, mark out the hole locations, then drill pilot holes to make mounting easier later on. We set the top on the legs, then I centered it and marked the hole locations using an awl. I'm not using the holes toward the front or back of the arms, just the ones that go down the center of the main framework. This way, as the wood expands and contracts along its width, it isn't fighting against the hardware. I also threw on some blue tape to use as a quick guide to help line things back up more quickly when we get it into Katie's office. With the top upside down, I drilled the pilot holes at the locations we just marked out. I used a flag on the drill bit to make sure I wouldn't drill too deep and poke through the other side. We carried the legs up to her office in pieces, followed by the top. I slid the leg halves together, flipped the frame upright, then set the top on. I ran screws in from the bottom, through the frame, and into the solid top, locking it down securely. I plugged all the wires in, then ran the legs all the way up to make it easier to work under. I mounted the height controller to the bottom of the desktop, then routed all the wires and hid them under the cable management tray. Now this tray is intended just for all the onboard cables that allow the legs to function. To tame the computer cables, we need to install this other tray. First, the brackets get mounted using our pre-drilled holes. Then, with the help of our shortest assistant, we screw in the tray from the back. After setting up the workstation and tucking all the cables away, everything looks nice and clean, and there's only one wire for a power strip that hangs down to get plugged into the wall. Well, I think we made Katie pretty happy with this one. I know it was just a simple build, it's just a flat surface on top of some legs, but that's exactly what she wanted, was simple and clean. It's got a lot more real estate on it than the last one, so she's got more room to spread out while she's working. And then when she wants to stand up, all she has to do is push one little button and do a pre-programmed height that she set. The whole thing will lift up, and then she can get right back to clickety-clacking while standing upright, and it stops where she wants it. Then, if she wants to go a little bit further, she has this cute little roll-away treadmill thing that you just have to slide up, plug it in, and put one more preset height in it, and get back to exercising while she works. It's exactly what she wants. Her whole office is the way she wanted it now. We got a lot of brownie points today. So, thank you guys for watching. Thank you to FlexiSpot for supporting the video, for providing the hardware to make this thing possible. If any of you guys would like to find any of this, the links are down in the description. Go check them out, and we'll see you for the next video.